Expand your mind and enrich your world. It's time for another outstanding podcast from ICRT.
Hello and welcome to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk. I'm Keith Menconi. Taiwan is carrying out a quiet lobbying effort for the purchase of advanced fighter jets from the U.S., but when those requests made headlines recently, even senior Taiwan defense officials acknowledged many of the purchases are unlikely to happen anytime soon. And it's not just jets. Many key arms deals between the U.S. and Taiwan have for years failed to make any progress. And now many warn that the military balance across the Taiwan Strait is tipping in China's favor. To help us parse through exactly what it is Taiwan's military is hoping to purchase and how these sales could affect cross-strait relations, I spoke with Randall Schriver. He's the president and chief executive officer of the Project 2049 Institute, a Washington, D.C.-based think tank focusing on Asian security issues. He also served as a deputy assistant secretary of state during the Bush administration. Here's our conversation. Randall Schriver, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So just to kind of start things off, I was hoping that you could give us sort of the big picture view, what's going on in terms of these deals between the U.S. and Taiwan, and what's kind of gumming up the works, slowing it down in a lot of cases.
Well, in brief, China is still continuing with a very aggressive buildup opposite Taiwan, creating in the minds of, I think, many supporters of U.S.-Taiwan relations a need for the United States to step up its security assistance. However, it has been quite some time since the U.S. government has approved an arms sales package that would require what's called a congressional notification. In fact, it's the longest stretch of time since the Taiwan Relations Act was passed in 1979 between congressional notifications, and that time, of course, is still ticking forward because we don't have one in the works right now. There are several systems that I think Taiwan could use and could help meet this challenge that China poses, but for a variety of reasons they seem to be held up, and I think most of those reasons are on the U.S. side that simply doesn't want the inconvenience of a problem with China that may result from another arms sales announcement.
Would you say that it's largely pressure from China? Is that kind of what you're talking about that's making the U.S. reluctant to move forward with some of these deals?
Well, it's pressure from China and a perception on the part of U.S. government officials that the security environment is improving because the political environment between the two sides has improved, and that the arms sales, if they were to go forward or be announced, would cause disruption in what is already a troubled U.S.-China relationship. I say perception because I think the case is very overstated. And I think the historic record is proof that the United States can have a robust security relationship with Taiwan to include arms sales, as well as a good relationship, constructive relationship with China, and we're ignoring that historical record.
I've actually heard rumors that the Obama administration has sort of ruled out any possibility of making arms deals before the end of the second term. Have you heard anything along those lines?
Well, I can't speak to any decision along those lines. That would be in violation of the TRA as far as I'm concerned, because the Taiwan Relations Act is very clear that the arms decisions will be made solely based on an assessment of the cross-strait military balance and Taiwan's military needs. So if a decision has been made based on political considerations or based on the U.S.-China relationship, that would be outside and inconsistent with our law. But it is clear that things have bogged down, and again, we have this historically long period of time that has passed between arms sales announcements. So there is something going on inside the Obama administration, to be sure.
Now, what about the Taiwan side of all this? I mean, we often hear about the Taiwan administration kind of flip-flopping on some of these deals, not being sure which packages it wants, not budgeting all the money that it would need. Do you think that that's a significant factor in slowing this all down at this point?
No. Certainly Taiwan has resource constraints, and certainly if some of these systems were to be approved, it would be challenging to come up with the budget. But in the past, Taiwan has always come through in the aftermath of an approval from the United States government. And after all, why would any democratically elected legislature approve money for programs that haven't been approved and are very uncertain? This has already occurred in the case of the F-16CDs, where the LY did pass a budget for those systems, and that money basically sat there and had to be returned to the Taiwan Treasury Ministry of Finance because the U.S. ultimately did not approve those systems.
What about the issue of espionage? A lot of people point to the concern that if the U.S. sells advanced weapon systems to Taiwan, there's always the concern that it could some of those secrets could be stolen by China. Is that a significant consideration at this point?
It's a red herring as far as I'm concerned. This would be true of any security assistance relationship we have with friends and allies in Asia, if not around the world. And certainly there are cases of Chinese espionage attempts directed at Japanese programs, at Southeast Asian countries, and so forth. Taiwan, because of the persistent and long-term threat that China has posed, has actually done a lot more on counter-espionage and on safety measures, so that we should have a high degree of confidence that these systems enjoy protections. It's not perfect, so there's still some risk. But again, I think that's an overstatement of what the actual risks are.
So now let's get a little bit more into what it is exactly that Taiwan is hoping to purchase. We hear a lot in the headlines, especially recently, about the fighter jets and some of the capabilities that those have, including stealth abilities and the ability to take off on a short runway. Are those the most important purchases that Taiwan is looking at this point, or are there other things as well?
Well, there are other things, and sometimes it's difficult to, identify the top priority versus another system. I would say certainly Taiwan needs fighter jets. We're getting to the point where we will have to start asking the question, does Taiwan need an air force at all? Because the existing fleet is aging and getting more difficult to maintain. There is a program to upgrade existing F-16s. That's, I think, a valuable program. But they need replacements for older platforms such as F-5s, ultimately the Mirages. And given the evolving threat from China, certainly a short takeoff or what's called a V-stall, a vertical takeoff type ability would contribute greatly to Taiwan's capabilities. So I think fighter jets should be on the list, should be high on the list, but I would also include systems such as submarines, given the changing nature of the Chinese threat with their own submarine fleet, their own surface fleet, and so forth.
You mentioned briefly just a moment ago the ability to take off vertically, and that's one of the capabilities that Taiwanese defense officials mention quite a bit. Why is that something that they're looking for that it doesn't have currently?
Because China has over 1,000 ballistic missiles. If you had cruise missiles, probably a couple thousand ballistic and cruise missiles capable of targeting Taiwan's airfields, and therefore you don't really need to take out all the aircraft. You don't need to engage in air-to-air combat if you're China. You just need to disable the airports and military facilities that traditional fighter aircraft can use for takeoff. So if you have a vertical takeoff capability, you can shelter those aircraft, protect them from ballistic cruise missile attack, and then get airborne and into the fight with virtually no runway needed, and simple parking lot would do. So it's given the threat from China, ballistic and cruise missiles, and the ability to target Taiwan's military airfields, it becomes essential to have this vertical takeoff capability.
And my understanding that in 2011, the Obama administration did approve retrofitting some of these fighter jets and making modifications to fighter jets that Taiwan already has. And some defense officials say that will be sufficient for Taiwan's defense for the next 20 years. What's your take on all that?
I think it's a good program. I think it'll give Taiwan a more capable platform. Certainly the existing F-16 AB platform is in need of retrofit and upgrade, but overall I would say it's insufficient to meet the growing threat from China, and in the short term actually worsens the problem because you have to take F-16 ABs out of the fleet to perform this retrofit. So Taiwan is going to be faced with the challenge of either maintaining and sustaining very old platforms to meet this gap while the F-16EABs are taken out for retrofit. Ultimately, Taiwan needs to replace the aging fighters and needs a more robust capability.
So it sounds like you're saying the main deficiencies right now is there's specific capabilities that the current fighters are missing, but it's also a numbers issue. There's just not enough fighters on Taiwan's side.
It's both. It's quantity and quality in this case, in my opinion.
All right, and let's get back to you were mentioning submarines a moment ago. Can you go into a little bit more detail why that would be important for Taiwan to have access to that kind of equipment in a conflict with China?
Well, it's a combination of things. China has its own submarine fleet, which is growing and growing more capable, given the purchases they've made from Russia as well as their own indigenous program. And speaking from the perspective of a naval officer, somebody who had a career in anti-submarine warfare, the conventional wisdom, I think, remains true that the best anti-submarine warfare platform is another submarine. So Taiwan needs some ability to counter the PLA Navy submarine fleet. But in addition to that, it provides an anti-surface capability, so if Taiwan were to ever face a blockade, submarines would be the most effective platform. They're stealth platforms and would give Taiwan a much higher degree of confidence they could counter a blockade. They can be used for maritime reconnaissance to deal with not only PLA submarines but surface ships, so they can relay data back to Taiwan to have a more accurate maritime picture. And at the end of the day, this would be a capability that could be integrated into a broader system of defense that would involve the United States and other allies with anti-submarine warfare capability, because this is data that we would very eagerly want in our defense community, and we would work, I'm sure, with Taiwan to address the PLA threat with the data they're collecting through their own submarines.
So with this logjam of defense deals, how do you think that this all affects cross-strait relations? As many have noted, Taiwan and China in a lot of diplomatic avenues are getting closer, but do you think that the defense issue in itself actually kind of affects the trajectory that those talks are going in?
Well, potentially. I think post-Sunflower movement, we've seen a bit of a stall. I don't think after 22 agreements we're going to see a flurry of new agreements between the two sides. Uncertainty about the approaching election and Taiwan has probably also caused a bit of a slowdown in the momentum between the two sides. But at the end of the day, very few people understand or take the time to study the impact that U.S. arms sales to Taiwan have on cross-strait relations. And in fact, the data might be counterintuitive to a lot of people. My institute, along with the U.S.-Taiwan Business Council, did a very exhaustive study of every U.S. arms sale to Taiwan that resulted in a congressional notification from the passage of the TRA in 1979 to the present. And what we found is in the aftermath of a U.S. arms sale to Taiwan, there was actually an improvement in the cross-strait relationship in a measurable way. And you could cite the examples of the 1992 150 F-16 sale to Taiwan, which was followed shortly thereafter by the first cross-strait dialogue, the 92 dialogue, and resulted in what some call the 92 consensus. You could even cite the Obama administration, February 2010, the $6.4 billion arms sales program that was then followed shortly thereafter by ECFA. So people sometimes express concern that U.S. arms sales to Taiwan could disrupt cross-strait relations, but the historic data suggests that just the opposite is true, and I think we should be data-driven on this, and we should continue to support Taiwan in an effort to actually support cross-strait relations, not disrupt them.
And what is your sense of why that might be? Do you think it's sort of the classic issue of negotiating from a place of strength? Do you think that that's why it might improve relations?
I think it's a combination of negotiating from a position of strength or just having greater confidence, because the arms sales themselves provide a certain capability to Taiwan, but it's also an expression of U.S. support to Taiwan, which impacts, I think, Taipei's thinking in negotiation and impacts China's thinking. So it's negotiating from strength, but it's also a statement of where the U.S.-Taiwan relationship is, the health of that relationship, and what that means for China.
If these kind of deals continue to fail to make any progress, how do you think that that's going to affect the dynamic between Taiwan and China going forward? Is that going to encourage an arms buildup on one side or the other, or what do you expect?
Well, there is an arms buildup on one side. Despite all the efforts since Zhou came to power to improve cross-strait ties, all the achievements that they've made and that I support, the buildup has continued apace. It hasn't slowed, it hasn't been reversed, it's continued. So there is an arms race of sorts, but only one side is participating. The question is, can we, from the United States perspective, assist Taiwan in maintaining a credible defense, a deterrent capability, so that Taiwan can continue its negotiations with China on whatever issues Taipei chooses to engage on, whether that's ultimately on political issues, we can't know for sure, but whatever issues they want to address, they will do so more effectively with the support of the United States and a robust arms program behind them. I can only guess that if the military balance continues to fall more out of balance and more in the favor of China, at some point China will be tempted in the direction of more coercive actions and more coercive diplomacy than compared to what we've seen the last few years.
What do you think that might look like? Do you think that might actually get to the point of military altercations?
Well, it's possible. We're getting a flavor of this in the East China Sea and the South China Sea, occupying islands and more aggressive military tactics in areas where there are disputes. I think if China doesn't sense that Taiwan has the will to maintain a credible deterrent, and they don't see their political objectives getting any closer, which, after all, at the end of the day, China's objective is crystal clear. They want what they call reunification or unification. Then, at some point, they may resort to more coercive tactics, which I think would make, at a minimum, would make things much more dangerous in the Taiwan Strait.
Going back again to the dynamic between Taiwan and the U.S., do you think that this is going to continue, this inability to get these deals through, or what is the trend that you expect going forward?
I don't have a sense that there's any urgency in the Obama administration to address this problem. I could be wrong. I'm, of course, not serving in the administration. I do think a real test case will be the submarine program, because it appears that Taiwan is getting more serious about an indigenous program, which would then still require the assistance of some outside parties, and that would probably include the United States. So at some point, U.S. defense industry or consultants and contractors will start to submit licenses to the U.S. government for permission to participate in Taiwan's indigenous program. That will trigger a decision from the United States government, the Obama administration, one way or the other. So hopefully, having served in the Bush administration that made the decision to approve diesel-electric submarines for Taiwan in 2001, hopefully the Obama administration will stand by that commitment.
We've been speaking to Randall Schriver. He's the president and chief executive officer of the Project 2049 Institute. Randall Schriver, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Taiwan Talk. As always, we'd love to hear what you thought of today's program. You can leave us a comment on our Facebook page or rate and review Taiwan Talk on iTunes. You can also leave a comment on the ICRT blog, where we've posted a few links to articles about today's topic. That's it for today. For ICRT, I'm Keith Menconi.